Okay, now we're recording now, and Grandma, you have in your hands a picture. What is that picture? Do you know?
It's the old rock house that Aunt Jackie lived in
Okay.
and raised her family.
Hey, tell me what you know about that rock house.
Well, I'd never seen it, but just heard Papa talk about several of them building it for Aunt Jackie's family after her husband George died, George Williams. And they all had family gatherings and I believe that Grandpa died there.
Uh-huh. Oh, Grandpa died at the rock house. Under what circumstances did he die?
Well, it was my understanding was that he was on his way from Uncle Bob's to Aunt Jackie's home, and he got wet. He was in the rain, and he took pneumonia
Uh-huh.
and died of pneumonia.
Uh-huh. Okay. Renee, would you hand Grandma another picture? Let me kind of see the picture while you're handing it to her, so I can be of a little bit of help. Okay, the next picture has got two men in it, and I just kind of like for you to tell me who those two men are.
Oh, it's Brother Frank and Buddy Mulkey.
Uh-huh. Instead of handing that picture to Renee, would you just kind of turn it around, and I think I'll focus in on it right there where you sit. Just right there
this
with
way.
me. Uh-huh. Yeah, just like that. And I'll do my best to focus in on that picture. Okay, now Uncle Frank is on which side now?
On the left side, and this was made at Knott's Berry Farm here in California.
Oh, uh-huh. And then the other man is...
It's Ernest Franklin Mulkey, you know, Laura's oldest boy.
Uh-huh. Tell me a little bit about your brother Frank. Now, you mentioned a little bit about him yesterday.
Well, he died, had a heart failure at No, it was a little town called, I can't remember the name of the little town, but anyway, he had eaten his breakfast in a restaurant and had just got up and walked out of the building and into the street, and he had this heart failure and fell, and they took him across the street to a nursery in the schoolhouse, and he died there.
Uh-huh. You went back to the funeral, didn't you?
Yes. They notified me, and I took the bus and went out there, met Ella and Ada. Ada was Walter's wife.
Ada Harrison.
Uh-huh. And Ruby, they all met me there, and we was at his funeral. I always thought Mama would have been happy if she could have seen what a nice funeral his friends gave him, you know.
Mm-hmm. Take a look at this picture.
Oh, this is the...
this picture is yours, by the way.
Yes.
This
is the Williams family. And Emmy Burton and Lon Burton and Lizzie Stebbins was her name. And I forgot who Allie married, but she, Allie had an accident, was burned to death, you know.
Oh, I think you told me that.
Yes. And the little girl there by her is Georgia, and the next one's Willie. And the others, I know the boys, there's Manuel and Raymond, but I don't know who the other one, I think he must be Harry Stebbins.
Renee, if you take that picture, put it about the same level that Grandma's face is, right next to her, and about the same distance away, I can turn the camera on it and I can get a pretty good shot of it. And I'm gonna,
About how you want it?
well, I don't want it at an angle like that. At an angle, it can't possibly focus.
Yeah, like that.
And if you hold it straight up, it'll focus. Bring it in closer. It's the camera's having difficulty focusing on it. Yeah, it's just not focusing like it ought to. I don't know why. Let me take off the automatic and see if I can zoom in on it. Bring it in a little closer, perhaps. Okay, this is the picture we've just been talking about of Aunt Jackie's family. And Aunt Jackie is the farthest one in the picture to the left. And Lon Burton is the fellow about 2 over from her in the hat.
Yes.
No, excuse me, Aunt Jackie's right in front of Lon Burton. Aunt Jackie is directly
Yes,
in front of
she
Lon
is.
Burton.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Lizzie Stebbins is
there,
next to Emmy.
And Emma Burton is right there next to her mother,
Yeah.
the second one over. And that's how the picture is. Okay. From this far away, it was hard for me to tell, but that's the correct order. Okay, hand Grandma another picture, if you would please, Renee. And,
Just Chisholm.
what do you know about Jess Chisholm?
Just hearing Papa talk about him, and that drove their cattle, on the old Chisholm Trail, and about them camping out, and always had to be watching out for the Indians.
Okay, there's Jack Chisholm right there, or Jess Chisholm right there. Grandma, you told me a story once about how after they came in from a cattle drive, he was just a little bit mean to his poor wife.
Yes.
And I'd like for you to tell me that
Papa
story.
always
if you
thought
would,
that
please.
was just a little bit, boys, and made them a real nice dinner and put a nice tablecloth down on the ground to set the dinner on. And he made remarks that hurt his wife. He didn't think he should have said those things. She was just being kind and nice, But he thought it was a little too fancy for the just cowboys, that been on. And he kind of scolded at her, and Papa didn't think he should have.
Didn't he throw some dung right there on the table
Yes.
and everything?
Yes, he did that.
He was just a little bit, shall we say, mean.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
Okay, we've got another gentleman we'd like to have you take a look at here. Not really a gentleman in this case, however. This man was no gentleman.
John Wesley Hardin. I've heard his name, but don't know very little about him.
Have you ever heard your dad talk about him?
Yes, I've heard him just talk about him being kind of mean, but I don't remember.
Okay, now this is John Wesley Hardin, and bring it a little forward because we have an unfortunate problem with the lighting when you. Anyway, this is a picture of John Wesley Hardin, and the reason I show him and the reason I bring him up was that he was a notorious outlaw in the area of Brown County, and that is where the Forsyths lived. And I wouldn't doubt but what he at some time or another caused them some grief, just like he did all the other farmers, stealing their cattle and shooting people and everything else. Grandma, what picture is that you've got there? Do you know?
It looks like a picture that's made in New Mexico. Is that right?
Yeah, it's made in Corona, New Mexico. Dave Popp's kneeling there, but mostly it's Cox's. Lots and lots of your Cox relatives.
Yes, I see Fred, and these smaller ones, I don't remember their names. And there's Aunt Susie, we always called her. That's Jim Cox's wife. and cousin Nancy.
I don't know if I've ever showed you that picture before.
I think maybe I saw. Yes, I think I did see it once before. And
Does that bring back any memories for you?
well, a lot, because we'd go up there and visit them once in a while and see all of them, together. But I don't remember them too good, because especially the younger ones. But I do remember hearing them talk a lot about Dave Pop. And this is him with the dogs, isn't it?
Right, that's him. On the back of that, it even tells the names of the dogs.
Well, I'll say. And there's Jim Cox. And I don't believe I remember who some of them are.
Okay, the picture that Grandma's just been looking at and recalling some of these Cox people is this picture that we're looking at right here. And there at the bottom is Dave Pop with the dogs. And I'll just sweep the picture one time, just to give an idea, not only of the Cox family, but also I'll back it up and show a little of the terrain in Lincoln County, New Mexico. Back it up.
Laguna Mountains is
Okay.
the name.
These mountains are the Laguna Mountains.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, Renee's about ready to hand you another picture. And the picture, oh, okay. Can you see the picture from where you sit?
Not very well. Oh, this is Papa and my mother and Marie Mulkey, and it's one of the little boy is one of Laura's children, but I don't know which one. Douglas, maybe.
Oh, Doug.
And there's Edith and Ernest Franklin and Aunt Mary Forsyth and Uncle Bob. And this is their barn there in Pushmahawtaw County.
This is whose barn now? Aunt Laura's barn?
Papa's. It was
yeah.
made at my Papa's home. And he had been sick a long time, and Aunt Mary and Uncle Bob had gone to visit him, and that was their buggy in the background.
David, let her sit in the chair too.
Okay, I'm recording. That's my wife hollering at my children because they're misbehaving. Okay, let's start again with the picture in view. On the far left of the picture is Mary Stripes Forsyth. Sitting in front of her is her husband, Uncle Bob, Robert DeKalb Forsyth. In the front, the children are Aunt Laura's children. And the gentleman in the picture right now with the children on his lap is my great-grandfather, grandmother's father, William Jasper Forsyth, often called Bud. And let me see if I can focus it. And then right behind him is his wife, which is my great-grandmother, Nancy Roxiana Pear Forsyth. So, and in the background, as Grandma said, is their barn. Tell me a little bit more about that picture. Anything you can remember about that place, or about
Well, it was a very, just kind of a log cabin-like type, and they had bought it because they planned to stay there for some time. And Papa had his garden, and not very far from the house.
That's in Findlay, Pushmataha County?
Findlay, Oklahoma. And Mama it was a place where it rained quite a lot, and you could have such pretty flowers. And walking up to her house from the creek, it was just a joy to look at it. She had so many pretty flowers, but I don't think it shows the house there. It just shows the barn. Jackie Williams. I never seen Aunt Jackie, in person. I've always just seen her in the pictures.
If you'd like to hold that kind of up next to your, right next to your face, I can zoom right in on it. Okay, tell me a little bit about anything you remember about Aunt Jackie that you didn't tell us yesterday.
Well, I don't believe I can remember very much. She come to visit Lon Burton and Emmy and her daughter, and they come up to visit us there. We didn't live very far from where they did, and but I was away from home, didn't get to see her.
You know who that is, Grandma?
This is my grandfather, Forsyth,
Uh-huh.
and I never seen him in person, but heard lots about him.
If you'd like to put him up next to your face, I'll just zero in on the both of you. Okay, is there anything you haven't told us about him thus far that you might like to tell us?
No, I never seen him, and I don't know a lot about him. Of course, Papa talk about him, but being so small, I didn't.
Did he own cattle?
Oh yes,
He owned a lot of them.
Well, to do man.
Uh-huh.
They used to drive his cattle to Kansas, and he had a bunch that was burned up there in that big fire that you read about in history.
Oh, I don't know about that. Tell me about it. Is this up at Abilene, at the cow pens?
Well, they drove them from Brownwood, Texas, into Kansas on the old Chisholm Trail, and someone living there in Kansas set the prairie on fire and burned some of the cattle up.
I'll be darned, I didn't know that. Anything else that you might recollect about him?
And not a lot, no, I don't remember too much about him.
Oh, yes.
Let me see if I know
See, I'm
this.
getting faster.
Oh, this is Uncle Bob's family.
Have you seen that picture before?
No, I think you did show it to me when you first got it. Maybe that's now what was his wife?
Elizabeth Jane Van, I think, was
Yes,
the first. Betty Van, they called her.
Now, the only one that I had ever seen of his family that's here was John Forsyth, and that's him down here.
Okay, let's zero in on John. Put it up at about the same level as your face. Look beside it, and I'll zero right in on it as best I can. Let's see, I've got the other mag on. I better try to bring that. Just bring it in by hand. Okay. Now let's see what happens. Point to John again.
Right here on the right.
Well, that's a female you're pointing to. Just the male just above.
That right here.
Oh, the one that's right above Uncle Bob. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, right there.
And I heard a lot about the other children, but I never did meet any of them.
Anything about Uncle Bob that you'd like to say that maybe you didn't say yesterday?
Well, him and after he, or even before he married Mary Stripes, he used to come to visit us, and that's about all I do about him, just seeing him when he come to visit us.
Okay, you can put that picture down again. Of course, he was quite a well-to-do man in and around Zephyr and Brownwood and Mullen and all of those communities in there.
He had one boy, Henry, that
I don't want Grandma to see it. Who's that?
That's my mother, Roxy Ann Forsyth.
So put that one kind of up by your face, and I'll zero in on her a little bit here, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about her. Okay, I've got a real good shot of her. Tell me a little bit about her, if you would, please.
Well, she was about the busiest person in her lifetime that I ever knew. And I've often wondered how she ever managed to do all the things that she did for such a large family, and always having to cook for cowboys, and always ready to help the sick people in the community. And I look back over the time and wonder how in the world she ever managed. But she did it joyfully. She loved to help people.
Any memory you have of your mother, just think of something. I mean, think of if there was one thing that you'd love to remember most fondly about your mother, or just one incident in her life, or just
Well,
something like that.
I guess it would be her love for her family and the care that she was always ready to give us. And she loved to go to church. In fact, that was about the only places she did care to go, was to church.
Okay, who is that gentleman?
My father, William Jasper Forsyth.
Raise him a little higher and I'll zero right in on him. Tell me a little bit more about him.
Well, about all I can say about Papa is he's just about the best man I ever knew in my life. And always busy. Ready to help anybody at any time. And I'm very proud to have had a father like him.
Okay. Anything else? What is your the one outstanding memory, the most outstanding memory you have with him? If there was just one thing you could tell about him, what would it be?
Well, it's just his love for people and his desire to help everybody that needed help. And how he loved his family. One thing that was especially interesting was when our home burned up. He had gone to Comanche with some friends. In those days, they went in wagons and to get their month's supply of food and everything, you know. And he came home, and the house had burned down while he was gone, and they didn't notice it till they was right up to the house. And he was so hurt, so excited. The only thought that he had in his mind was to know that his family was saved. So he came running to a neighbor's that we had gone to and asking, is any of the family hurt? And when he heard that there wasn't, he said, well, the rest didn't mean much.
Was this the fire at Walters in 1932?
No, this was at Asphalt.
Oh, this is, so you had two fires altogether?
Well, the other one was our...
Was your house?
Our
Oh, this
house.
was his own house?
This is his own home.
Oh, so you actually were through two fires then?
Oh, yes.
Oh, my goodness. Nobody should have to go through two.
And he was gone from home when that happened, you know. Just Mama was there, and I remember standing right by her when she opened the door and looked back down toward the kitchen and saw it all blazing.
What year was that?
Well, it must have been about 1906, the best I remember.
So you were about 11 years old then?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to say about him that you haven't said thus far?
Well, just his concern about people in general.
Well, Grandma, who's in that picture?
It's his sister Laura and myself. And
Now you're frowning. What's that all about?
I was remembering that I was a little bit angry that day because I didn't have on the dress I wanted to wear. I love frilly things. And my mother made me wear this one instead.
Didn't Laura have a brand new dress that day?
Yeah, she had her dress, if you notice, is all trimmed with lace, and I had one just as nice, but I didn't get to wear it. and I was kind of pouting.
Well, the reason I brought that picture, it's a beautiful picture, really, it is. And it's going to be around a long time. People are going to wonder, well, Grandma's not smiling in that picture, and they're going to want to know why. And now they'll know.
Yes.
It wasn't a happy day, but it was a picture that we have, and we're grateful for the picture.
I was proud of her, and just, you know, how kids are if they don't. I was thinking of the other dress.
Okay.
And-
Okay, who are you looking at in that
Aunt
picture?
Mary Cox, bless her heart. One of the best persons I almost ever knew.
Could you raise that just a little bit higher up next to your face, and I'll zero right in on her, and whoever looks at this can see Aunt Mary Cox as she looked. There she is, Aunt Mary Cox. How old is she there, do you know?
She must be getting up toward 75 or 80.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us
Just
about
a
her?
good old lady, and loved her children more than anything else in the world. Always good. And always had a Bible verse for most everybody. Mine, as you know, she said was
Proverbs 31.
yes.
Oh. Who was Henry Ford?
A man that Papa met in about, well, I don't know just how long he had known him. But the first time he said he's ever seen him was they was crossing the Pecos River. And they saw these two men coming, and they was waving at them to wait till they could get there, and they wanted to cross over the river with them. They had been they were coming home from taking a bunch of cattle somewhere and sold them, you know. And so he Papa told them yes, it would be all right for them to join them and go back to, said they was going to Texas. And,
Then what happened?
well, he stayed on, him and this Irish, it was an Irishman that was with him, and they stayed on at the range, and Papa gave both of them a job. And so one time Henry Ford come in and said to Papa that him or the Irishman had to go because they wasn't getting along, you know. And Papa told him that he couldn't. Said, well, I'm sorry about that, but he said, I can't let you go. He says, you've been too much help to me, and I need you. And he did Papa's bookkeeping and helped him in so many ways that he just felt like he couldn't let him go. So the other man did leave. And he was always a kind of a mysterious man to people, but Papa thought he was a very fine, good man. And he stayed on and worked for Papa for quite a long time. And then he went in the bank there at, wasn't it Brownwood? I believe, yes. And of course, you know the story about him calling Papa to come up to the bank, you know.
Oh, but I want you to tell me again.
Well, Papa said one night he got a call from him and wanted to come up to the bank, that he had something he wanted to tell him. And so Papa went, because Henry was a man that would have responded immediately to anything for him, and so he went to see him. So when he got up there, he took him in the back of the building, and he told him he had something to tell him that he had never told anyone before.
Wasn't Henry inebriated at this time?
Yes, he was. And Papa told him, said, now, Henry, if you've got something to tell me that's that important to you, he said, you wait and tell me when you're not drinking. And he kept him Henry wanted to go ahead and tell him, but Papa kept him telling it because he thought, you know, they were such good friends. Something might get out sometimes, and he might think Papa told it, you know. So he wouldn't let him tell it. And later on, Ford sent word for him to come back to the bank, and when he went back, he took him back in the room again, and he asked him, what did he tell him that night? And Papa said, well, you didn't tell me anything, but you wanted to, and I wouldn't let you. And so Papa said he was always glad that he didn't tell him just what it was.
Tell about the incident in the bunkhouse where the rat peeked out.
Well, Papa said he knew that he had come from a well-to-do family, and he had such fine education and spoke different languages, and said one night they were sitting talking, and there was in the bunkhouse, and they saw a rat come through a hole that was in the floor. And he said, Henry said, can I shoot that rat? Papa said, go ahead. And he did. And he says, you know, he said, damn things will eat a man up. He said, they found a man in my father's sewer at one time, and said those rats had eaten him up. And Papa said he knew by that he must have come from a well-to-do family, because that was the days when they didn't very many people have plumbing and sewers, you know. And then again he spoke of, Papa said to him one day, where did you get your education, Henry? And he said, Wheeling, West Virginia. And Papa said he knew he was a man of means, but as to just who he was, other than just Henry Ford, he never knew.
He spoke about 5 languages. He was the Indian agent. He was a banker. He was the county clerk. He was a lot of things.
Yes.
And among the other things he did, he saved the people of Brownwood during wasn't the Great Depression in the 20s, but it was a depression they had in the late 1890s. He saved Brownwood, Texas, literally. In fact, he saved the whole county. With some of the loans that he made, trusting people, and of course they came through and were able to pay back those loans. And he was, when he died, one of the most dearly beloved men in that county, in that part of the Texas, perhaps. But there was a rumor about him being somebody other than just Henry Ford. What was that all about?
Well, some people believed he was Jesse James, but Papa said that he never did believe that. He knew that he could have been someone else, you know, other than Henry Ford, but he would never believe it was Jesse James.
But Jesse had made the Bob Ford shooting look just kind of not a real thing. And people thought that maybe he was still alive. And,
and there was some mystery about Frank James coming later and putting up a monument there. But
and this is just
at that time we was living in New Mexico ourselves, and his sons got Uncle Bob to write to Papa and tell him everything that he knew about him. I wrote the letter for Papa myself. He told me what to write.
Those are for his pocket calculators, what he called the wheat oats, hay, and corn calculator, or something like that.
Well,
they were little miniature almanacs, and in addition to telling you when the sun would be in first quarter and second quarter, and when the tides would be in the seasons, and sunset and sunrise, and when to plant and when to harvest, it also in the back of that had little histories of Brown County, Texas.
yeah.
And that's what he wanted that for. And I've seen some of those. I've seen several of them. And he did a good job as a historian for Brown County. What else did your father ever tell you about Brown County, or about Williams Ranch, or those early Texas days?
Not a lot. Him and Uncle Bob had a store there, and the people was pretty rough. them days, you know. They drank a lot, and I was teasing Uncle Bob one time and asked him if him and Papa drank very much, and he said, well, they were among them.
You know, I read in a book once, it said that you could not come to the Forsyth store or homestead where the latch string was not out and the hospitality was not just tremendous. Did he ever talk about that?
Yes, he did, about how friendly everybody was in the neighborhood. And they also had Indians there, you know. They killed the Jackson family. And you probably know more about that than the history of it than I do.
Yeah, for Brown County history.
Yes.
There was, I mentioned John Wesley Hardin, but I didn't mention Sam Bass. Sam Bass was another of the famous outlaws in that area. Did your dad ever mention him?
I heard Papa calling his name and speaking of him as an outlaw, but I didn't think much about it, you know, as a child. But I did hear him say that he was an outlaw. And when they'd be out herding cattle, I've heard Papa say that you run into several of those rough fellas here and there, you know. And, but I don't think he ever knew them, any of them, just really very close to any of them.
You wouldn't want to get close to those people.
No, I'd say
you might lose your life, or your cattle, or both. Okay, now, let's skip way up into the future. This is right around maybe 1916. You are just a newlywed, and Elder Fred S. Hess comes to visit the Forsyth family, and Elder Carlisle Smith. And your mother was baptized at that time.
Yes.
Member of the, like I say, the Mormon Church, which is my church. So I'm quite interested just in how that all came about.
Well, they were missionaries there to that part of the country, you know, and they just kind of made our place their headquarters. I mean, I had married and moved away, you know, but they'd always come to my father's house, you know, and they'd go around in the neighborhood and meet people and always come back to our, I say our place, I mean my father's home.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And if there was anything, any kind of work that they happened to be doing, they'd just turn right in and help them out, you know. And Elder Hess was one of the nicest persons you could ever meet, and a very well-educated man. Wrote letters for Papa to some relatives in Bolivia, and Papa thought the world of him, and suggested that when my baby Hess was born, you know, that I name him.
What town was that in? Was that by Waurika, probably?
Yes, it was 9 miles east of Waurika.
Where did they baptize your mother at?
There on the farm where they lived. I wasn't present at the baptizing, but I heard them talking about it.
You told me once that Fred Hess and his companion were one of the first guests that you had in your home.
Ever had in my home, yes. And Mama and Papa and them come up one Sunday and spent the day at my house. And they teased me. I'd taken an order for the Lee Manufacturing Company and got a set of dishes at a premium. And I gave Mama the big dishes, and I kept the small plates, you know. And when we were eating, I apologized for my small plates, and he said, well, just so you have something in them. And we had to laugh about it.
There was one time you had a little bit of let's say a cyclone or a tornado, or a zephyr. They called them a lot of things back there, but all of them were terrible. And Elder Hess didn't want to go down in the storm cellar. Tell about that.
Well, they just, the two of them was, well, I'm not sure that this was Elder Hassett, though. It was two of the missionaries, but I'm not sure that it was.
Hi, Grandma. Give me a kiss. Hi.
And, have a seat.
All right.
But they did, they were there, and all of everybody that lived there in the neighborhood, you know, run to the storm cellar part, away from storms, you know. And they asked, aren't they coming? And they said no, that the Lord would protect them. And they didn't go. They didn't go with us. And I thought they was pretty foolish not to come, but they didn't seem afraid.
I remember during one of the world wars, I guess it was the Second World War, there was an old song that a preacher wrote, and it was called "Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition." Sounds like they didn't pass much ammunition that day, they just praised the Lord.
That's right.
And run for that storm shelter. But they were preserved, so I guess it worked out.
Yes.
It would have been unfortunate if something would have happened. Well, yesterday, more or less, we got up to 1932. But I want you to mention just a little bit, because he died in 1927, your father-in-law, John James Wheeler, and what kind of a man he was, and what he looked like, what color his eyes were, anything you remember about him and the type of man
Well,
he was.
he favored your dad, and he was tall, built like Glenn, and he's very portly, very well-dressed man, almost always. And he stayed with us a while after we were married, and he wanted to go in business, so he bought a store at Claypool, Oklahoma, and run the store for quite some time until his health began to give way. And then he sold it and went back to Texas and died in 1927?
27.
Yes.
Aubrey, Texas.
Uh-huh.
Dad remembers one incident in his life where he met his grandfather Wheeler. I guess he and Uncle Tess had gotten into some eyedroppers. Do you remember that?
Yes, he had a lot of medicine left over from the store that he'd had in Texas, and had brought it up and stored it in an old house that was on the place where we were living. And the kids got out there and got into it, and he scolded them a little bit. They thought it was terrible, but he didn't. I think maybe he brushed them a little bit.
Bark was worse than his bite in that
Yes.
case. But it scared them.
Yes.
Well, that's good. They probably stayed out of his eyedroppers after that. Renee, would you like to take the children out and pick lemons?
There's a sack right behind there, your chair, and Hess picked a few, but you was leaving, and he did. You can get all you want off.
More than anything else, I just want them out there. You made too much noise in here. Well, let's proceed. I know that we were in 1932 at Walters, Oklahoma, and tell me a little bit about the town of Walters and when you moved there. I guess you had just moved there from Temple.
Yes.
And just tell a little bit more about that. I don't think we really got into it yesterday.
And well, when we left Temple, we rented a place from John Parrish, and we lived there 2 years on his place, and then we moved east of Walters, about 2 miles east, and that's where our house burned down, you know. That's where Joanne was born, it was a 2-story house, and that's where we had the fire, and Glenn was caught upstairs, you know.
You said something yesterday that kind of intrigued me, and it's been on my mind. You mentioned at the birth of Aunt Joanne that you basically almost went on the other side.
Yes, I think I did.
just for a moment, ponder it, and then just explain what it was like, what you were seeing visually.
Well, not really seeing as I felt. I just felt like I had drifted into a very pleasant place, and I wanted to go. I didn't want to be brought back. And the doctor kept telling me, "Don't do that. Don't go to sleep," and kept shaking me, you know, and caused me to want to come back. But it was very pleasant and felt very much at ease.
Mom mentioned something about colors. Did you notice any color?
Well, I can't recall that there was any color other than it was just something surrounding me. Just kind of something that was very pleasant and restful.
Okay, 1932, and Aunt Joanne is born now. What's everybody else doing in 1932?
Well, it was harvesting their crops, you know. And it was I think in September when our house burned, the best I can remember. And we were getting ready as soon as we got everything straightened up, we were going to move back to where we first lived at Temple, and did after the house burned down.
So you were only in Waurika maybe a year? Excuse me, in Waurika
Walters.
a year? Or Walters, about a year?
Oh, well, we lived west of Walters 2 years, and then we just lived 1 year on this place that burned down.
Oh, I see. So, you lived at the other place maybe 1930 and 31, and then there in 32?
Yes, we moved in 1932 back to Temple where we first lived, you know.
Were quite a few of the same people still in Temple, so that you had some of the same friends?
Oh, yes. You know, after we got moved back, the old friends that lived there just did everything in the world to help us, you know. Come and brought things that they knew we'd need.
I guess word of the fire had pretty well spread.
Yes, it was in the newspaper, and the friends at Temple, we were, you know, at Walters when it was happened, and the people at Temple read about it, and they all come with things to help us.
What newspaper was it?
It was the Walters Herald.
So it would have been in the Walters Herald about September 1932?
Yes.
Did you live in the same place when you went back to Temple?
Not the same house. No, we lived in what we called the B&O cash store. Bob and Otho Mooney owned the home, and we rented from them. And
I've heard Dad talk about Bob and Otho Mooney. He said that they owned the largest country general store in the world. Is that a claim that they made?
Well, I don't know whether it was in the world or not, but then it was a big store, and they did well there for years, but they finally sold out to Sears and Roebuck.
Oh, that's it.
Before we left there, yes.
When did you leave there?
Well, we lived on this, what we call the B&O store place, about 5 or 6 years.
So you were there until about 36 or 7, maybe?
Yes,
maybe even 38.
Maybe. No, Glenn and Jean went to high school there, so it was in 1940, I should think, or 38 or 40.
Okay, right around 1938, Dad went into the CCC camps.
Yes, we were living then at the B&O place.
When did Uncle Hess leave home?
Well, and from that place, let's see, it must have been about 1938, 37 or 38. right
Yeah.
off, I can't recall.
Now, he wasn't there in 1932 when you had the fire.
No, he was in Oklahoma City then,
What was he doing there?
going to school and working, selling papers or anything he could find to do to help pay his way.
1932 was not the easiest year to make a living, was
No,
it?
however, we did have a good crop that year, and but we had harvested the crop, before we left up there at Walters.
Well, maybe she'd like to tell you about the Depression, about how they killed all the cattle.
Well, Mom, why don't you take over some of the questioning for just a
Well,
little
no,
bit?
I've got to go in just about 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh.
Dad, we've got to go home teaching.
Okay, for 5 or 10 minutes, then you take over the questioning. And,
Well, I don't know what you've asked her.
well, nothing about that. We talked about brownwood and some other things. So go ahead and just let me stretch my legs, and you can ask some questions.
Well, do I have to get up from the camera?
It's hearing you right now.
Okay, what I'd like to, tell us about the Depression, how it affected your family.
Well, everybody was, having hardships, but that was the Depression was during in 1932 and 33, and they did kill the cattle all around us, and one had 8 or 10 head that they wanted to kill, but he wouldn't allow it. We didn't ever have any cattle killed. And the way we saved them was we had to haul water in barrels from a big creek. They called it Mud Creek. And that big lake that goes to Waurika now was where Mud Creek used to be, or still is, of course. And
what else did the Depression, how else did it affect your family?
well, just about like it did to everybody, that was just, you had to work for the county to kind of make enough money to keep your family going, while you were making your crop.
Well, tell us about some of the experiences that you had during the recovery and the Depression. I know that you did like everybody else, but when we show somebody else sees this tape maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, or even the young people now, they won't know what the Depression was about unless, tell us some of the experiences, what did it in your mind?
Well, you'd be surprised at how well people managed, even in times like that. There'd be a few in the community that had it worse than others, But with our family, it's just to think back over it, why, we managed just pretty good. We went to work and made a garden and raised chickens and turkeys and got along pretty good, considering the way a lot of people had to do.
Well, the CCC camp, though, was one of the things that
Glenn went to the CC camp.
That was to help the young boys.
Yes.
Now, what did they have the CCC camps for? What was that?
To help the families that, make the crops, and the boys would send their checks home, and the people would buy food and buy food for the horses to make the crop with,
Did they get an education too, or?
They did get an education, but some of them waited till they got back from the camp, to go back to school.
Well, how about, did they help the families at home?
Yes.
How did they do that?
Made $30 a month, and you said $25.
You want a question, Glenn, maybe that you would...
Well,
Yeah.
no, listen,
We've got to go.
there's something that you've got to do before you go. I want my 3 children lined up right in front of Grandma, and I want my dad right next to Grandma. Just stay where you are, and they'll just get around you. And I want to get a picture of my children with their grandfather and their great-grandmother.
Well, that'd be nice.
Button up his buttons, Renee. Let me get here, because I'm going to have to do some fancy work.
How about their grandma?
Their grandma can get right in there, too.
Yes.
But,
You just want this as a generation.
Couldn't Renee be in it too?
She could be in it too. Anyway, kids,
You
get in the
want-
picture.
She could sit in my lap, I guess, if I can get her. I can't lift her though.
Okay.
I've got a weak hand.
I mean, if you'll stop for a minute, I'll put her up on.
Everybody get kind of close to Grandma. Put your faces right in close to
I'll
Grandma.
let him and her put the baby.
There's David and Grandma, and Diane with Grandma,
Nancy, don't cover.
Nancy, you're covering
Nancy
the,
with
put the shadow
Grandma.
on the baby's face.
and Dad with Grandma. Now, Nancy, get in a little closer.
Let me,
All of you there, except Mom's in the way.
well,
Now, I could lift her.
Now, you can't see Grandma at all, but anyway, let me get up above and maybe we can take just a picture like that. But anyway, there is everybody with their Grandma.
Would it help if
Okay. And then there's Mom and Dad together. Right there, and Renee's trying to get so that she can make a quick getaway in case I try to film her. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Hold it over my face.
You through with us?
Hi. No, not yet.
you don't want us to behave, you don't want us to move and talk for you?
Hi.
You know, this isn't a still camera, Phil, it's a television camera.
Hi.
Well, okay, you can talk. What do you want to say, Mom?
I don't know what I want to say.
Just said it. Dad, what do you want to say? Nothing.
Don't ask the kids.
Grandma's going to have to say a lot of stuff before it's all over. Okay, thank you, everybody.
You should look at me like you adored me.
Oh, I do.
Oh,
No.
oh, here
I
comes
said
it.
I got the girl's picture on
Well,
the
We
boy.
gotta go, Mom, we gotta go home teaching.
Well,
Walk
And
around.
my family's going to
Daddy,
go for a
come
little while.
down.
I put the trash out.
Okay, thank you.
Just a little bit.
Okay, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Grandma, you've read the Bible all of your life. What are some of your favorite scriptures?
Well, the 23rd Psalm is one, and the 90th Psalm, and well, I just the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. I always loved that. They read that at Mama's funeral.
Did they read the entire chapter?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and that was one of her favorites. And well, I loved it all. It's hard to just say the exact one. And I always loved the one that Aunt Mary always said was mine, you know.
31st Psalm.
31st.
Proverbs, I mean.
Oh, yes.
What is your favorite music? What are your favorite songs?
Near My God to Thee is one, and In the Garden, and The Old Rugged Cross, and the older songs that they have.
Mm-hmm. What was your mother's favorite scriptures?
Well, she loved that 13th chapter, 1 Corinthians, because it spoke of love, you know, and she loved the 23rd Psalm. She wanted us children to memorize that, but some of us did, some of us didn't, you know. I did pretty well. And she loved the whole Bible. She read it all the time.
Mm-hmm. What was her favorite music? Favorite songs?
But just about what I like. Of course, some of them, I don't think the Old Rugged Cross had been sung at that time, written at that time. But anything that Sunday was the day that the young people would come to our house, or they'd go somewhere else, and a lot of times the older families would go too, you know. And she just loved music, just in singing, no matter what it was, just as long as it was religious.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mostly what, even then, them days, that the young people loved to sing the religious songs.
Mm-hmm. Did your dad enjoy reading the scriptures?
Yes, he read the Bible lots, but he never could make up his mind that any one church was just the right church. He thought that everybody had a chance, and any time anybody that preached come in the community and wanted to hold a meeting, why, he's always ready to send his boys out to help build the arbors or whatever.
What was his favorite music?
Almost anything. But he loved music very much, and he bought Lowly a nice organ, and Ella was Sister Mary's daughter. She was kind of felt left out because she didn't have one, and he bought her one. And he wanted music in the community among everybody. A lot of people, weren't able to buy organs, and so but he always loved music. And just as soon as they called them Victrolas back those days.
Phonographs today, or
Yes.
stereos, they call them,
Yeah.
or gramophones then,
Yeah.
too.
And he bought one when they Victor, where they had the picture of the
The
dog.
dog, the old white dog.
Yes,
with
and
the big
the
cone.
big horn.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I meant was the
that
horn.
was the first one we owned, and then it was just as soon as they changed them to the little cylinder type, he bought one of those. We always had music. I can't recall ever not having music at home.
Give me some of your thoughts about Jesus Christ.
Well, I believe in him with all my heart and soul, and I believe if people would study their Bible, they'd find an answer to almost any problem they'd ever have. That has been my experience. And I don't think I would ever have made it this many years if I hadn't read it and believed it. And I talked to Laura when I was down there, and she said she knew it was the same with her.
Was he a savior of the world or just a great teacher, like some men say?
Well, I think he was a great teacher and a savior of the world altogether.
I think it's so important for young people to realize what their grandparents and great-grandparents feel about the Bible and these things.
One of the happiest, the most pleasant memories of my life was the mornings when we used to go to church and have prayer before we ever started classes. And that's one of the great sorrows of my life today, is when they took prayer out of the church. I think it was a big mistake, because young people was young, and they grasped the thoughts that the teacher gave us, when she read the Bible, and we acted on it. We believed in it. And I believe it would be the same today with children if they still had it in the church, in the school. That if I was leaving a request behind me, that's one thing I'd ask for. Let's put prayer back in the church, in
the school.
Yes.
Did you ever dance in your life?
Oh, I love to dance.
What are some of your favorite kinds of dance, like square dance or?
Well, no, I really preferred the waltzing and just ballroom dancing. And though I love to square dance and everything, but I think if I'd had a preference, it would have been ballroom dancing.
I was told that your brother Arnold was quite a square dance caller.
Yes, he could call. And there was no shortage of boys that could call those days. There was one boy named Bill, Benson, Bill Benson, that I've often wondered how he ever picked up what he did, that he called for everything. In all the dances in the little towns around and out on the ranches and everywhere. And it was, to hear people calling at places like that, of course I haven't been to any dances now for years, but he was almost as good as anybody you'd hear today. And everybody enjoyed it too. I always felt a little bit guilty about dancing because Mother was just a little bit afraid that it wasn't the thing to do, you know. Papa always thought that it was something entertainment that young people should enjoy. And he didn't feel bad about us children dancing. But Mama was afraid it might not be the right, right.
She was probably just raised in a way where they felt like
Yes.
dancing wasn't correct.
And but Papa always enjoyed dancing, letting us go and have a good time at dances, But of course, I always kind of felt I was kind of hurting, doing something Mama would rather I didn't. And though she was very nice about it, but had been brought up very strict, to not do anything that was wrong.
Where did you go to church, and
Well,
what denomination was it?
The Church of Christ usually was where we went, though I felt like maybe I was a little rebellious at that time. I wanted to hear other churches, but if I had gone like the way Mama preferred, and it would be into the Church of Christ. But every once in a while I'd go to other churches. And enjoyed it.
The Wheelers were basically Baptists, were they not?
Yes, the majority of them were Baptists.
Was the majority of the Forsyths Church of Christ, or was that just in your family?
Well, in my family, no, the majority of my entire family their preference was Church of Christ. And Papa he never could believe in just one certain church. He said he saw too many conditions in life where men and women were good people, and they had different denominations, and he kind of believed in Christians in all churches, because he'd seen people, die that he felt like that some of them belonged to churches and some didn't, and he thought that a God that could create a world could see through more than humanity could.
Could love them all.
Yes, and helped them all.
You have felt at times in your life that the Lord, that God has guided you and helped you and directed you. There was one particularly tough time. It was either in late 1943 or probably in early 1944 when my dad was on an extremely dangerous mission. It almost cost him his life, and he cried out to you. What was happening? He was in Europe at the time. What was happening to you back in Oklahoma at that time?
Well, it was pretty hard times, and we were struggling, to try to accumulate something, at the time that you're speaking of him crying out, I was in constant prayer. From the time they left, I prayed for, and I had the feeling in my heart that neither of them would be taken. But I just seemed to be assured that they wouldn't be. But this time that you spoke of, it was about 2 o'clock in the night, and I heard his voice, as plain as if he'd have been in the room with us. It said, "They've got us this time, Mama." And he told me later on that he actually spoke those very words when they was in this battle, you know, that so many of them was taken. And so it was so plain to me, I wrote and told him, and then he wrote back and he said it seems strange that he did speak those very words at that time. And I took his letter to the editor of the newspaper there, and she said she wanted to publish that because she had heard of other experiences like that, and Glenn being one of the boys that was there in Comanche, you know, that she'd just love to publish it, and I still have a copy of it.
Uh-huh. What newspaper was that?
The Comanche News, I don't remember if that was just what they called it or not.
But it was a Comanche newspaper.
Uh-huh, the Comanche newspaper, yes.
Uh-huh. Can you remember any other times in your life when you felt that prayer had a significant impact upon your life?
Yes, many times. One time especially when Mun's brother had been killed by horses out at Plainview, Texas.
Mm-hmm. And this, which brother was this?
Bennett Wheeler.
John Bennett was his full name.
Yeah.
I know that, but I want to get it on tape.
Yes. Well, it hurt it when he found out about it. They had tried to get the word to him in time for him to come to the funeral, but some way it didn't. So it unnerved him so bad that it affected his back, and he got down in his back and he couldn't get up at all for a while. And we had some calves to sell, and we had a crop of cotton and a feed, you know, for the horses and everything in the field, but it was just being harvested at that time. And so...
This was about what, about 1918, I think?
Yes.
Somewhere in there. I think that's when Uncle Bennett died.
Yes. And I was, there was nobody able to go get anything to eat. You know, we had come to the end of our rope, you might say. But somehow I just felt I had too much pride to go ask anybody to help us, you know. So I was just praying, now Lord, you know that we are just at the end of things, and we just got to have help. And there was a knock on the door one morning, and a fellow by the name of Thompson said, "Mr. Wheeler, I heard that you had some calves to sell," and he said, "I come down to look at them." And one told him yes, he did, and needed to sell them pretty bad, that we was needing things, you know. And so he went down in the pasture and looked at the calves, and he come back and he said, "You've got some very nice calves," but he said they're not as big as what he was buying. But he said, "If you need any money, I'd be glad to loan you some till you do sell them," which we had to have it because we needed food, you know. And I felt like the Lord had answered my prayer just that way, you know. And then there was another time when we were sitting on a porch at a place where we lived called Oak College. Right across the street was the school, you know. And
What year was that?
that was in about 19 and I'd say about 42, I believe it, 1940 or something, right along in there.
Right at the beginning of the war, or?
Yes. It was before Pearl Harbor a little
So it'd
while.
be maybe 41 or 40 rather
Yes.
than 42.
Well, we were getting pretty low on things. The month had worked out, and the man hadn't paid him yet. And but we were getting very low on food, and so while we were sitting, I was wondering, we had been selling some vegetables and had plenty of some things to eat and some things didn't, you know. So this truck went by, and I had asked the Lord to provide for us, and there was they had the tomatoes in crates, and he had a big truckload. And right in front of our house, one of those crates broke, and those tomatoes, great big cans of tomatoes, began falling off. And so we got, the kids run out and picked up 14 cans. Well, of course, the truck had just gone on, and they fell all the way because the school teacher and his wife said they picked up several cans as they come along, you know. But to me, that you'd be surprised how far you, in different ways you can use tomatoes, which I found out, you know, by having those. And there's so many things that's happen right when it should, that there's just no way to turn, you know. And
Is there a resurrection?
yes, I believe it.
And you expect to live again after this life?
Yes. I've lived all my life with that faith, and I believe it.
I think it's so important that we let our young people know how we feel about those things.
Yes.
I believe that there's a resurrection and that there's a life hereafter.
I surely do.
Just as surely as I sit here, I believe that it exists.
Yes.
And I know that God lives.
And my mother believed that with all her heart and taught it to us.
Well, let's get back in the period of time when Dad went to the CCC camps. It's pretty rough to give up a youngster to go away, isn't it?
I never had anything to hurt me any worse in my life, I don't think, than seeing him when he was in school and doing well, have to leave home and go to that camp. It wasn't too far away and wouldn't be now, you know, with the transportation like it is. But he had to go with a bunch of other young boys his age. And I don't think in my life that I ever had anything to hurt me any worse than that did. Those 6 months that he was gone. And, but I knew he was, I had letters there by the time he got there that I wrote, you know, so that he'd feel at home, and he told me that those letters helped him to adjust to that type of thing, you know. And I told him 6 months would pass soon, and that he'd be back in school, which he was. But it hurt him so bad, and my mother was there with us, and it hurt her too, hurt her bad, to see a young fellow like him, you know, have to go out and work like that. And but she prayed about it, and we all did, and we felt like that the Lord would take care of him and bring him home safely.
And he did.
Yes, he did.
Uncle Hess, he left home
When he was 17 years old.
about 1932, just before the Walters fire.
Yes.
I bet that was rough too.
Oh, it was terrible. And he enlisted in the service, you know, after he come back. After he come back from Oklahoma City. But
What year was that?
well, that must have been in the 30s, about 1930. No, it was even before the. Well, it was, I'd say about 1930 when he left going to Oklahoma City. And he was up there for about two or 3 years. And then he come back and enlisted in the service, you know. I didn't want him to enlist. That to me wasn't right either. But there was a fella by the name of Henderson that thought he was a real estate man and a good friend. We'd rented a place from him, and he told us that it wasn't bad, that he had been in the service himself, and he said would have a good chance at an education, and that's where he learned to become a librarian eventually, you know. Was that he went to work in a library in the service, and he went through the entire period that he enlisted for, you know, and come out perfectly all right, and was a lot of help to us. He has always been a thoughtful boy, you know, to help us in times of need, just like Glenn was when he went to the CC camp for us to help us.
Between them, they put in over 46 years of military service.
Yeah.
2 wars.
Yes, went through it all. And I know that it was prayer that brought them through it. And because I prayed constantly that the Lord would bring them through, and he did.
Well, it's World War II. How were things on the home front?
Well, now that was when Glenn and Hess went in.
1941 to 45. How were things at home?
Well, it wasn't as bad at that time for us as it had been during the Depression, you know. People was beginning to kind of come out. It was just the heartbreak that we had to go through to see them go to war, you know.
Just hoping they get home alive.
Yes,
Did they do quite a bit of rationing in that part of the country?
yes, you had to. I don't know hardly how we managed, but we was always very saving with everything, and what we were rationing, you had to have. I kind of forgot a lot of things we did, but sugar was rationed and flour, but we managed it. We made our own cornmeal, you know, and we managed and had plenty, and we raised good gardens, and we lived pretty good through it all. Had calves to sell and cattle, and Mom was always a good trader, you know.
Yeah, I heard that about it.
Yes.
Where did you live during those war years?
We lived there on what we call Whiskey Creek.
Oh, so you'd moved back down to there, or was it a different Whiskey Creek?
No, that was during the world. Let's see, that was World War I when we lived on Whiskey Creek.
Right. We're just during World War II.
Oh, we lived on the B&O place. And
Throughout the whole war?
no, we left there and moved over near Comanche, west of Comanche.
Well, 1945, the war got over. Tell me about that.
Well, we had, see, the children all had, some of them had married and left home, and some, Marywilda and Joanne was the only two that was left. See, Hess and Glenn, you see, was out here on the West Coast. And in 1944, Glenn was coming home then from England, and he wanted me to be out here when he come home. So I come to California in 1944 with Joanne, come with me. And Mon and Marywilda stayed back in Oklahoma. She had a pretty rough time of it. It hurt me awful bad to be away from her, but she stayed with Mon part of the time, and then part of the time she stayed with Luther Crabb and his old man Betty, you know, her cousins. And they managed fine, but still it was pretty sad for me, but I wanted to be here when he come home. So always I had to, whatever Mom wanted to do year after year, why, I had always gone along with it. But when I come out here and seen that there was a better chance to make a living in California, you know, than there was back there, the farming, we was getting older and we was doing well. But we decided to sell out and come out here. And we moved to El Centro, as you.
What year did you come? Oh, by the way, when you came out here, when Dad was coming home, you stayed with the Campbells there on
Yes,
Church Street. You took a job making salads for a luncheon situation, didn't you?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Come in.
I'll get this the door. Must be my children, because nobody else would be that rude to keep knocking.
It is the children.
I just ring the doorbell. Just one time, that's it.
And you guys get all the way from these wires. Okay.
Go ahead,
Tell me about that when you came out here.
Well, I worked at this church there in Chula Vista. There was a lady came over one night while I was at Miss Campbell's, and I asked her if she told me she was working at this church, and I said, you wouldn't happen to need any help? And she said, yes, I would. And I said, well, I'd sure love to find something to do while I'm waiting here for my son to get home. And she said, well, you're just an answer to a prayer. That was her words. And so I did work there for a while. And then I hadn't visited Laura. They was living up at Long Beach. And I wanted to see her before I went back to Oklahoma, you know. So I quit working there and went up to Long Beach and worked up there a while. Worked in a laundry. First time in my life I'd ever worked in a laundry. And then I also worked at the school a while up there. I put the food on the children's plates was my first job. And I enjoyed it all, but yet it was very sad for them to be away from Mom and Mary Wilde, you know.
She was, what, about 14 or 15 years old at the time, wasn't she?
About 14 years. And so as soon as Glenn come, I went back to Chula Vista and was there the day he come in. And him and Lily and I believe she took Bobby. Yes, she took Bobby and went to the railroad, the depot to meet him when he come in. She wanted just her and Bobby to be alone, so we waited at Miss Campbell's home there.
Oh, that must have been rough.
Oh, it was. But we was so happy that he was home, you know. Anything was all right.
He was telling me just last night about that when he got to the station and he saw them and he got the shakes.
Yes.
And he said he couldn't hold the baby. He was shaking so much and the tears were coming from his eyes. And he was under the opinion maybe it was good that everybody wasn't there to see him.
And Mr. Campbell had told us now that when he come in to not start asking him questions about anything, let him kind of adjust himself, you know, to, and he instructed us what to do, and we did that.
Yeah, he'd been to war too. So
yes, and it was good that he did that. I thought your grandpa and grandma Campbell were wonderful people. I really did.
Yeah, I was only a year and a half old when Grandma died.
Well.
But Grandpa I knew, and I just loved him.
Yeah. Well, she was a lovely person too. I loved her.
When was the first time you met my mom? She came out to Oklahoma.
She come to Oklahoma while Glenn was in the service with Bobby. And she didn't get there until about, I guess about 11 o'clock at night when we thought now she was coming and we'd have a few of the friends in to meet her, you know, when she come in. But it was they was all there at that little party they were having, and we sent in to pick her up at the bus station, or the railroad station. She come in on the train, and it was about 11 o'clock when she got out to our place. And I thought her not being used to farm life, that she probably wouldn't enjoy being on the farm, but she
Well, she
seemed-
told me she loved it.
Yes,
When I was writing her life history, she said that she just loved it. She said she liked riding on the wagon.
Yes.
She said Aunt Mary used to get mad at her because Aunt Mary thought she was just making fun. And she said she really did enjoy doing it.
yes, Mom was just harvesting the corn. And she would take Bobby, and her and him would sit in the seat and drive the team. And he liked that too, you know. And so she helped to gather that corn. And farm life seemed to enjoy it. We had lots of turkeys and chickens. And she seemed to enjoy it all.
Yeah, I know she did. I know she did too. When we were writing the history of her life, she spoke just very, very happily about that time. You know.
Yes.
And it was just so different and new to her. She was just fascinated by the whole thing.
And we thought because it would be so new to her, you know, that she probably wouldn't enjoy it much, but she did. I think the next day after she got there they were having the baccalaureate sermon at the high school, and
So it must have been right around May or June then, sometime in
and
spring.
she said that she had heard so many stories about people in Oklahoma. You know, she said that when she went, she was surprised that, you know, that people always wore their gloves and hats and really dressed up, you know. And she said she'd heard all these stories about Okies.
Oh yeah, in California.
And so she didn't expect to see them looking so nice.
Yeah. So that was just a period in history when, because of the Dust Bowl that hit that entire Oklahoma, Kansas area, and everybody streaming in. Well, it was the people who had nothing that were streaming into California.
That's right.
So really, people from Oklahoma got a real bad reputation. It wasn't really deserved.
That's right.
And she talked about that too. That, you know, that people would be coming in just in their trucks with literally nothing, you know, into California. And in fact, when Dad came to California, he told me, he says, "I'm from Texas." He wouldn't tell him he was from Oklahoma.
He's afraid they might say, you know, they called some of them Okies, you know.
And
He had too much pride for that.
It's on his marriage certificate that he was from Texas. Because he didn't want anybody to know he was from Oklahoma. So I guess, that period of time, it's just a historical fact.
Yes. It was hard time with a lot of people, but, you know, they had oil there at Duncan, and now it's at Comanche where we live, but they didn't have oil at Comanche when we lived there.
Well,
it's a very pleasant place to live. Such good people. You know, where there's not too many people, they're closer to each other and live closer to each other than they do where it's in the city.
well, I hate to say it about the age in which we live, but I think people were more honest then. I think people were more hardworking then.
I think that was because people were more religious, believed in and depended. And when in hardships and hard times, people turn to God more so than they do when they're prosperous and everything going easy for them.
Maybe we're too prosperous today.
Yes.
Well, what year did you come to El Centro?
In 1947, in February.
February of 1947.
First day of February when we got there.
Must have been pretty tough after all those years to pick up your roots and come.
Yes, in a way it was, but we had, at first, Mom said no. I told him when I went back home from California, I said, Mom, I've always done exactly what you wanted to do and thought was best for us, but I said, I have been out in California now and I see a better time for us, and I'm going back to California. and I said, I want you to go too. And he was very rebellious at first. He was doing pretty good. You know, we were getting on pretty good. And but I said it would be easier on you. And he thought because he'd always farmed and that a new way of life, you know, might be different for him. That's why he was afraid or hated to turn loose of everything, you know.
Well, it'd
But
be tough, you know, looking
yes,
back on it, it'd be an awfully tough thing
it
to do.
was. It was scary in a way to break up and sell off everything we had. And we had papers to put out to have a auction sale at our home. And we sold every single thing we had, even the rugs on the floor and the everything. And the people that we had to stay the one night or 2 nights, I believe, after we'd had this sale, and the people left the household thing in the house, the wood stove, you know, and everything, just until we got moved out of the house and said they'd come back and take it off. But there wasn't one single thing that we didn't sell.
Now, when you moved to El Centro, where did you live when you first arrived?
At the Palm Court, it was called, and it was built for the veterans during the war. And Mary Nellis took one of them and was waiting for us to come, and we lived there in Palm Court. And they stayed with us for a while, and then they moved out, and we stayed on there. And we lived in El Centro 10 years.
You lived at another place in El Centro too.
Yes, we moved up closer to the main street. Palm Court was 5 or 6 blocks from the main part of the town, you know. And then we rented a place, an apartment, and moved about a block from Main Street. And we lived there the rest of the time that we lived in El Centro.
I remember Grandpa was a caretaker of a park, and so was Uncle Ernest.
Yes.
Is that what Grandpa did when he first came out to California?
No, the first job he had was at a shipping point where they shipped lettuce. And he packed the lettuce in crates, and then they'd set it in boxcars, and he put pitched ice back on the crates in the boxcar. And he got a redwood splinter under his thumbnail, and it got infected. And the boss told him he better not come back to work, you know, till that was over. But all the doctor bill was paid, the company, and he drew his wages just the same. And I said, now suppose you had been on the farm.
Farm and hurt himself.
And I said, you would have had to pay your own doctor bill and everything, you know. So that encouraged him. And he thought that he felt pretty good about the way everything went, you know. And then Hess had got us an allotment while he had a bad spell after he'd worked a little while. And Hess got us a government allotment to help out while he couldn't work at all. And so that helped. And everything went good. And he would come. I used to ask him, would you like to go back and farm and live in Oklahoma? And he said no.
After he was here.
Yes.
You lived there 10 years. What are some of your memories of El Centro?
Well, very good ones. Right off, I had asthma, and it just seemed like right from the beginning I began to feel better in that dry, warm air.
Right, hot air.
Yes.
Wasn't just warm.
Very
El
hot.
Centro got hot.
I have seen it 119 and 20.
I've been there when it was well over 100.
And but you'd be surprised how you learn to take advantage of all the cool times, you know. And it was very enjoyable. We started going to church and got acquainted with the people, you know, and
Was that Church of Christ?
yes,
Of course, Aunt Joanne graduated from El Centro High School.
yes, she graduated there. She graduated 1 year, and Jerry, well, he was first, and then her the next year. They're going back this year to their
High school reunions? Oh, that's nice. Well, when did Grandpa get the job at that park?
Well, I went to a Stanley party one night, and I heard a lady talking about her husband being the foreman of the park, you know, and that they needed, I just heard her say they needed some help down there. I went home, told him about it. I said, maybe if you went down and seen Mr. Marshall that you could get the job. And so he did and got the job, and he worked there for the rest of the time that we lived there. For about, I guess, 9 years.
How long did Uncle Ernest live in El Centro?
About 7 years. He was pretty sick when he come out, and if he'd have took good care of his health, he would have gotten well too, but he was a little careless, you know.
I remember he had a park also that he was caretaker of, though.
Yes, and a good one. They liked him very much.
I remember one time he dressed me up like an Indian.
Yes, I remember
You
that.
remember that? I didn't have much on either, but I dressed up like an Indian. He took me out and showed me off to everybody.
Yes.
Of course, we were part Indian, and he knew that, and he kind of shared that
You
with
want to
everybody.
make you feel like an Indian, just to see, just for fun. He loved to play with children. Ernest always loved children.
So about 1963, you moved up to Ontario, is that about right? Or no, about 1957.
Yes,
Just maybe right after we went to Japan.
we moved in 1957 in April, and we had already bought the place 2 or 3 years before we moved there. Jerry and Joanne lived in it.
This is a place on 2313 South Fern.
Yeah. And then when we moved, well, it would just seem like just a dream come true for him, because he could buy calves and, well, really at that time, those big dairies would just give us the little newborn calves, you know. And Mom was a good hand to take care of them, and he'd fatten them and sell them, you know. We did well.
Is there anything else you want to say about El Centro before we leave it?
Well, that it was just a wonderful place to live. A lot of people wondered how anyone could say that about such hot place.
Oh, God.
But, you know, when you are sick and you get well and everything works out good and you meet good people, why, you can't keep from liking the place, you know.
I have a memory. I think both you and Grandpa at one time in El Centro had spent some time in the hospital.
Yes.
I remember going to the hospital, and we couldn't go in to see you, but you could see us through the window, and we went out there.
Yes.
What was the situation?
Well, it was at Calexico where the hospital was, and I had to have an operation for gallbladder.
Oh,
And so you all come down while I was sick, you know, come to see me. Of course, they wouldn't let the children come in, but then you did look through the window.
What was Grandpa in the hospital for down there?
Oh, he had ulcers,
Uh-huh.
and they had to operate. Then he had a hernia. He was pushing a wheelbarrow or something and hurt himself, and had to have an operation for that. But he got along real good and went back. It didn't take him very long. I think he was off about a month. And he went right back to work. He loved El Centro. He liked that work.
I'm sure you have a lot of memories of 2313 South Fern.
Yes.
What are some of those memories?
Well, it was just, he was so happy there, and I enjoyed having, I always loved a garden, and I had a nice garden.
Oh, you did. You did. You had a nice one.
Yes.
I remember.
There's so many different kind of fruits there too, if you remember.
Oh, you had walnuts and grapes and pears and oh boy.
Berries.
You had that pear tree out in the front yard.
Yes,
And you had that grape arbor. And you
Yeah.
had the walnut trees, several walnut
Yeah.
trees. In fact, more than several. There's probably about 4 of them.
actually, it's almost just a living right there on that place.
You always grew a lot of rhubarb and just
Yeah.
all of the vegetables.
Had just about everything. And we enjoyed living there, and Mom was very happy when we went back to Texas one time on a vacation trip. His sister didn't much like it because I got him to come to California.
Who was that, Aunt Alma? Or?
Alma.
Oh,
She was always kind of say things that it was very plain spoken, you might say. And so she said, now, I said, now you must tell Alma when we go back that you are happier out there than you were here, because she'd thought it was, she didn't want me to get him to come out here, And he told her, he told her he was happier than he'd ever been, and I was glad of that.
Well, you had chickens, you had cattle.
Yes, we did well while we lived on that place.
Yeah, I have memories. Of course, I lived in that place with you for a while.
Yes,
Out in that little room that was in the garage.
yes,
It was a finished, it was a finished room within
Yes.
the garage.
yes, the people that we bought from fixed that for their families. It seemed like everything worked out well for us, and we made the payments on the place. Then the freeway come along and took our home, They, as you know, the Pomona Freeway runs right where my house is
Yeah.
sitting.
Yeah, I think it's the off-ramp that's actually where the exact spot. I went
Yeah.
down there one time, just tried to figure exactly where it was. That's because Jenny Lee's still there, so you
Yeah.
can just kind of gauge about 3 or 4 houses.
Yes, you
Uncle
can.
Josh, when he fell off the roof, was that right there on Fern Street?
No, it was over in Chino.
Uh-huh.
He was doing some work for the man that butchered the calves, He had a locker,
Uh-huh.
and Josh was working on the roof of his home, and he fell off, and he didn't live too long afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Grandpa always liked to play dominoes. I remember he was very good at dominoes. What were some of his hobbies?
Well, playing games, dominoes was his favorite, and because I enjoyed playing too. I played games with him. He was good at checkers too.
I can still see him in my mind's eye, putting on that straw hat he had, and taking that little stool that had the handle on the side of it, and going out in the morning with a pail and milking those cows. I
Yeah.
can see that. I can see that
Yeah.
right in my mind as I speak it.
We had all the milk and butter that we could use, and people come to our house and bought milk and butter from us. It got to be too much work for us, and we had to sell the milk cows because his health was beginning to give way.
Now, he passed away in 1962. What are your thoughts about that? I'm sure it wasn't a happy time in your life.
Well, of course, it was about the saddest experience of my life, and but I had been brought up to feel that the Lord would look after us, and I thought that to do what He would want me to do. I stayed on there 5 or 6 years after he passed on, and that was the shape I had been left in, and my thought was to make the very best of it, and I did all right, Of course, the children all helped me, and you children were a lot of help too.
I remember I used to walk down there. It was quite a ways, but I used to walk
Yeah.
down there a lot.
And Dennis used to come too, you know.
And he'd walk down there too.
Yeah.
We'd come down sometimes in the car. But a lot of times we used to just like to take off and walk down there.
Yeah.
A couple of miles anyway.
Uh-huh.
Well, you live here now. What are some of your
Well,
thoughts here?
I like the neighborhood. This was my choice when we were, the real estate man was taking me around to show me places, and we passed this one. And I said, I like the location of this place. And but he told me that his name was Hess, Mr. Hess, and he said no, that he thought this had already sold. And but I still wasn't satisfied. I thought, well, he said he wasn't selling this one, but we got the address.
That's
on,
probably the reason you didn't want to get it right away.
and Hess wrote down the number that we saw out on the thing to advertise it, you know. And we called Mr. and Ms. We called Mrs. Carson. She died a couple of years ago, and she sold me this place.
It's been comfortable for you.
Yes, it has been very nice, and I've had a nice life since I lived here. I was happy because I was near where he's at, you know, and then all of your children has made it very nice for me.
Well, Grandma, that brings us pretty much up to right now.
Yes, I believe so.
And I just appreciate so much you're taking this time to kind of walk down memory lane through some
Yes.
sad times and some happy times.
Well, I've enjoyed it all too.
And I think that we have a record here of the family that we'll be happy to have for the many, many years.
I can truly say about life that of course, and I don't regret that I walked through the hardships in life, and but I've had a good, fulfilled life, no complaint to make about it. And I've always give the Lord the praise for all of it.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Well, I'll take my unruly little brood here.
Well, they're not unruly. They've been awful sweet for children. I think they've come into Grandma.
They didn't do too well tonight, but they
Okay.
usually do pretty well.
Emma just thinks she's real sweet, and he is too. Mm. So I'm glad he come to see me. He's a good boy. I wish I could see him more often.
Yep, that's my fault.
Okay, well, thank you, sweet girl, too, just growing up like I want you to. And I hear you making good grades at school.
She doesn't like math.
She doesn't, well, she will. She'll learn it and she'll like it.
She told me that. It's very difficult.
And it won't be long until you'll be in school, too, will it?
Yeah. She's only 3, and then she has to be 4, and then 5, and then 6.
Do you like school, David?
Yeah. I can
That's
feel my
good.
birthday. He's making lots of friends.
Yes.
In fact, on one of the bars, and that's what I got for my birthday.